Mercy was never meant for men like us. I remember the first time I saw it. Not the infection itself, but its shadow, cast long across the face of a miner who had stumbled into my Medicae tent on the eastern ridge of Calros. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, his skin slick with sweat despite the perpetual cold of the deep shafts. The man trembled as I examined him, muttering about voices in the darkness, about a communion waiting in the depths where the drills had breached something ancient, something hungry. I am Medicae Sergeant Deron Vey, formerly of the 47th Vostroyan Regiment, reassigned to the mining colony of Calros after sustaining injuries that made me unfit for frontline combat, but perfectly suited for tending to the endless parade of industrial accidents that plague this emperor-forsaken rock. 23 years of service to the Imperium, and not once had I questioned my duty until the day Patient Zero walked into my tent. His name was Turnus, a shaft foreman with 15 years of experience, not the type to imagine things in the dark. The man had a wife and 3 children in the upper hab blocks. I knew his eldest son, who had once come to me with a crushed hand after a conveyor malfunction. A good family by all accounts, loyal to the Imperium and productive in their assigned tasks. This made what happened to them all the more tragic. I diagnosed Turnus with neural fatigue and mild hallucinations caused by extended exposure to the mineral dust that permeates the lower levels. This was common enough among the deep shaft workers. I administered a mild sedative, prescribed 2 days of rest, and sent him back to his quarters. 3 days later, his wife dragged him back to me, unconscious and burning with fever. And there, beneath his nightshirt, I saw the first signs of what would soon consume our entire colony. The skin across his chest had hardened, taking on a chitinous quality that resembled nothing human. Small protrusions, like the beginnings of insectoid limbs, had formed near his collarbone. I isolated him immediately, sending word to the colony overseer that we might have an unknown contagion loose in the population. I should have burned him then and there. The Emperor forgive me, but I should have ended it before it began. Within hours, 3 more miners arrived with similar symptoms, all from the same deep shaft team as Turnus. Each exhibited the early stages of the transformation, their humanity slowly being rewritten by something that defied imperial medical science. By the 3rd day, I had 17 patients secured in a makeshift quarantine zone, and the first of them had begun to change in ways that still haunt my dreams. Turnus was the first to complete the metamorphosis. His body contorted one night, bones cracking loudly enough to wake the other patients. His skin split along his spine, revealing a carapace beneath, iridescent in the stark light of the Medicae lamps. His screams became chittering sounds, inhuman and desperate. But his eyes, Emperor save me, his eyes remained his own, filled with awareness and silent pleading. He knew what he was becoming. He recognized me, even as his body betrayed him. That night, I learned that some fates are worse than death in this cruel universe of ours. The colony overseer ordered a full quarantine of the Eastern Ridge mining complex. 273 souls locked down, with my Medicae tent serving as the focal point for what was quickly becoming a nightmare beyond comprehension. Vox communications with the main settlement were maintained, but physical contact was severed. We were told that an astropathic message had been sent to the nearest Imperial outpost requesting immediate assistance. Help would arrive in 3 weeks if the message was received clearly. 3 weeks that might as well have been an eternity. By the end of the first week, nearly half of the quarantined population showed signs of infection. The pattern became clear. Those who had worked in the deepest shaft, extraction point Epsilon 9, were the first to turn. The contagion spread outward from there, infecting family members, then neighbors, then anyone who had prolonged contact with the infected. I established protocols, segregating the population based on exposure and symptoms. Those still showing no signs were kept furthest from the infected, though by then I suspected it was merely postponing the inevitable. The worst cases, those like Turnus who had begun physical transformation, were secured in the maintenance bay, the only structure with doors sturdy enough to contain whatever they were becoming. It was during this time that I began to notice something even more disturbing than the physical changes. The infected seemed to develop a kind of collective awareness, a hive mind that grew stronger as their bodies changed. They would move in unison without verbal communication. They would speak in fragments that, when pieced together across multiple patients, formed coherent thoughts. They referred to themselves not as individuals, but as extensions of something they called the lineage, or the brood. One night, as I made my rounds among the early-stage infected, a young woman named Elsha, the wife of a drill operator, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were clear, the fever having temporarily receded, yet something else looked out from behind them, something ancient and patient. "We have waited so long beneath the stone," she whispered, her voice overlapping with itself, as if multiple voices spoke through her. "The Star Children sleep in the blood now. The ascension comes for this world, Medicae. You cannot stop the embrace. The Star Father knows you are here." I sedated her immediately, but her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind during the brief hours of sleep I managed to steal between crises. Star Children, Star Father. These terms meant nothing to me then, but they would soon become a litany of horror that defined my existence on Calros. The physical transformations accelerated during the second week. Those who had been first infected, including Turnus, completed their metamorphosis into something no longer recognizably human. Their limbs elongated, additional appendages sprouting from their torsos. Their mouths widened, filled with needle-like teeth. Some developed additional eyes, while others lost their eyes altogether, their sensory input apparently shifting to organs I could not identify. Yet the true horror was not their appearance, but their behavior. They retained enough of their human minds to communicate, to remember who they had been, yet they spoke of their transformation as a blessing, a gift, an ascension to something greater than their former selves. They begged me to join them, to open myself to what they called the communion. When I refused, they looked upon me with pity, as if I were a child refusing enlightenment out of simple ignorance. The maintenance bay became a chamber of horrors, the fully transformed moving with disturbing coordination, tapping messages in code against the walls at night. Messages I later realized were being received and understood by those in the earlier stages of infection. They were communicating across the complex, sharing information, coordinating without my knowledge. On the 9th day, I performed my first mercy killing. Harren Volk, a lift operator who had shown symptoms only 2 days prior, underwent a sudden and violent transformation. Unlike the others, his body rejected the changes somehow, resulting in a twisted hybrid of human and something else that could only writhe in agony on the floor of the Medicae tent. His wife and daughter, also infected but still in the early stages, watched with expressions that mixed horror with envy. "Please," Harren gasped between spasms, his voice still human though his mouth had begun to reshape itself. "Emperor's mercy, Medicae Ve. I can feel them inside, crawling, changing, make it stop." I administered a lethal dose of sedatives, watching as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. His wife thanked me, then asked why I had denied him the gift of completion. She said this while stroking her daughter's hair, the child's scalp already showing patches of hardened carapace. I had no answer that would satisfy either of us. That night, I broke into the Medicae stores and consumed enough amasek to temporarily blur the horrors I had witnessed. In my drunken haze, I reviewed my notes, searching for patterns, for anything that might help me understand what we faced. It was then that I noticed something I had overlooked in my exhaustion. Every infected patient reported the same dream before showing physical symptoms, a dream of standing in a vast cavern before a being they could not or would not describe, receiving a gift directly into their blood. The infection site was not the lungs as I had assumed, not something airborne. It was the blood. Somehow, something in that deep shaft had found its way into their bloodstream, hijacking their bodies from within, rewriting their genetic code with a template that was decidedly inhuman. I thought of old stories I had heard during my service with the 47th, whispered accounts from veterans who had faced the Xenos horrors that lurk in the darkness between stars, tales of gene stealers, tyrannid vanguard organisms that infiltrate human populations, corrupting their genetic structure to create hybrids loyal to the hive. But those were just stories meant to keep young guardsmen vigilant, weren't they? Such horrors could not reach an isolated mining world like Kalros. We were too insignificant, too far from any reported hive fleet activities. As the second week drew to a close, I was forced to acknowledge a grim reality. The quarantine was failing. The infection had spread to nearly 70% of the isolated population. The maintenance bay could no longer contain the fully transformed, who had begun to work together with frightening intelligence, using their new forms to attempt escape. Twice I was forced to administer explosive charges to sections of the complex where the creatures had nearly broken through to the remaining uninfected population. Each blast buried colleagues, friends, people I had shared meals with only weeks before. People who, in some tragic way, were still conscious of who they had been, even as their bodies and minds became vessels for something inhuman. I told myself that I was granting them the Emperor's mercy, that death was preferable to the existence they now endured. But in the night, when the screaming and chittering from the sealed sections grew loud enough to penetrate the walls, I wondered if I had become as much of a monster as the things I was fighting. The colony overseer maintained daily Vox contact until the beginning of the third week. Then the communications became erratic, filled with static and disturbing background noises. On the 18th day, the overseer admitted that cases of the infection had appeared in the main settlement. Whatever containment we had hoped to achieve had failed utterly. The contagion had spread beyond our quarantine zone, perhaps carried by vermin, perhaps through some means I could not comprehend. In our last coherent communication, the overseer ordered me to gather all remaining uninfected personnel and attempt to reach the emergency shuttle bay on the western ridge. From there, we were to evacuate to orbit and enact Quarantine Protocol Omega, which would alert any approaching Imperial vessels to the contamination of Kalros. I gathered the 27 men, women, and children who still showed no signs of infection. We armed ourselves with mining tools and the few lasguns available to security personnel. Our plan was to move at night, when many of the transformed seemed to enter a dormant state, conserving energy or perhaps communicating with whatever intelligence directed them. We nearly made it to the service tunnels that would lead us to the western ridge when the attack came. Not from the transformed humans we had been evading, but from something else, something that had been waiting in the shadows, patient and cunning. A true Xenos horror, a pure Astrain genestealer as I would later learn to call it, though in that moment it was simply death incarnate, moving faster than human eyes could track, its claws slicing through flak armor and flesh with equal ease. Half our group died in the first minute of the ambush. The creature moved with a predatory grace that belied its alien nature, targeting the armed adults first, leaving the children for last. I managed to wound it with a lucky shot from my las pistol, the beam catching it in one of its multiple eyes, causing it to retreat momentarily into the darkness. In that brief respite, I heard something that froze my blood. Singing, a child's voice, singing an old Vostroyan lullaby that I recognized from my own childhood. From the shadows emerged a small figure, no more than 8 years old. It was Mira, Turnus's youngest daughter, her skin pale in the dim emergency lighting, her eyes reflecting the red glow like those of a nocturnal animal. "Do not be afraid, Medicae Ve," she said in a voice that seemed to echo with others behind it. "Father has told us about you, about your kindness, about your reluctance to embrace the gift. The Patriarch wishes to meet you, to thank you for caring for his children during their transformation." She extended a small hand toward me, her fingers elongated slightly, the nails hardened into claws not yet fully formed. Behind her, more figures emerged from side tunnels, transformed colonists in various stages of their metamorphosis, moving with the coordinated precision of organisms sharing a single consciousness. "The Star Father waits below," Mira continued, her childish voice creating a grotesque counterpoint to the inhuman words. "In the birth chamber where he awakened. He has been waiting so long, Medicae, Thousands of years since his vessel was lost, and he was forced into hibernation beneath the stone. The mining woke him, and now the brood grows. Soon there will be enough of us to signal the hive. The fleet will come, and Kalros will ascend to become part of the greatest organism the galaxy has ever known. I raised my las pistol, aiming at the child who was no longer a child, my hand trembling with exhaustion and moral revulsion. I had taken an oath as a medicae to preserve life, to heal the sick and injured. But what stood before me was no longer human life as the Emperor intended it. It was a perversion, a corruption of humanity by Xenos influence. My duty to the Imperium was clear, yet I could not pull the trigger. Not on a child I had once treated for childhood illnesses, who had brought me drawings of what she wanted to be when she grew up, a medicae like myself. In that moment of hesitation, the purest strain emerged again from the darkness, and the slaughter resumed. I remember little of the next few hours. Flashes of violence, of running through service tunnels slick with blood, both human and Xenos. The screams of the dying, the chittering communication of the pursuers. Somehow, I found myself alone, the sole survivor of our escape attempt, hiding in a ventilation shaft as the transformed moved through the complex below, searching for me with senses far beyond human capability. For 3 days I evaded capture, moving only when necessary, surviving on emergency rations and recycled water from condensation pipes. I made my way toward the western ridge, driven by some stubborn instinct for survival, even when my conscious mind had surrendered to despair. The colony had fallen. Even if I reached the emergency shuttle, where would I go? What quarantine facility would accept a survivor from a gene-stealer-infected world? I would be shot on sight by any Imperial vessel, and rightly so. Yet still I moved, crawling through the arteries of the dying colony, bearing witness to its consumption by the alien brood. Through ventilation grills, I observed the transformed colonists dismantling machinery, repurposing materials to construct something in the central hub. A beacon, I realized, watching them work with the coordination of insects in a hive. They were building a psychic amplifier to signal the Tyrannid hive fleet, to guide the great devourer to our insignificant world. On what I believed would be my last day alive, I reached the emergency shuttle bay, only to find it already occupied, not by the transformed, but by something worse. The Patriarch itself had claimed the area as its throne room, surrounded by the most complete of its children. The creature was massive, a nightmare amalgamation of insectoid and reptilian features, its carapace bearing the scars of ancient battles. 4 arms ended in claws that could shear through bulkhead doors, while its head housed a maw of crystalline teeth and eyes that reflected the cold intelligence of a predator species perfected through eons of evolution. Around it knelt the transformed colonists, their bodies now fully hybrid, human features merely an echo beneath the dominant Xenos physiognomy. They attended to the Patriarch like acolytes to a dark god, bringing it offerings of food, machinery, and worst of all, the few surviving untransformed colonists, bound and drugged. I watched in horror as one by one, these last pure humans were brought before the Patriarch. The creature would extend a taloned hand, inserting something, a proboscis or ovipositor, directly into the victim's torso. The victim would convulse briefly, then grow calm, a look of rapturous acceptance spreading across their features as the first stage of infection took hold. It was then I noticed Turnus among the transformed, his body now a grotesque parody of his former self, yet still recognizable by a distinctive scar that ran along what had once been his jawline, appeared to hold some position of authority among the brood, directing the ceremonial infections with gestures of his elongated limbs. The others deferred to him, and even the Patriarch seemed to regard him with something akin to approval. My position in the ventilation shaft gave me a clear view of the shuttle itself. It appeared intact, its systems likely operational. If I could somehow distract the gathered Xenos abominations, I might reach it, might even manage to launch before they could stop me. A suicidal plan, but the only one available to me. I was preparing to make my desperate attempt when the Patriarch suddenly grew still, its alien senses alerting it to something the others had not detected. Its head swiveled, multiple eyes scanning the chamber until they fixed directly on my hiding place. A chittering command issued from its maw, and immediately several of the transformed leapt toward the ventilation shaft with inhuman agility. I scrambled backward, firing my las pistol blindly through the grill, knowing the futility of resistance but unable to surrender to the fate that awaited me. Claws tore through the thin metal of the shaft, hands reaching in to grab at my legs. I kicked and fought, emptying my las pistol's charge into the press of hybrid bodies below. Then came a sound that cut through the chittering and hissing, a sound I had given up hope of hearing. The distinctive roar of Imperial dropship engines, followed by the staccato percussion of heavy bolter fire impacting the exterior of the complex. The Emperor's angels of death had arrived, drawn by the astropathic distress call, or perhaps by their own inscrutable methods of tracking Xenos incursions. The transformed, scattered in momentary confusion, the psychic link with their patriarch disrupted by the sudden attack. I used this distraction to break free from the partially collapsed ventilation shaft, dropping to the floor amid the chaos. Rather than making for the shuttle, I dove behind a stack of supply crates, putting solid cover between myself and the patriarch, which had risen to its full, terrifying height, issuing commands to its brood in a language of clicks and psychic impressions that hurt my mind to perceive. Through viewport windows, I caught glimpses of dark blue armor adorned with silver skulls, the insignia of the Silver Skulls chapter of Adeptus Astartes. Drop pods continued to fall from the sky, disgorging squads of Space Marines who moved with coordinated precision toward the complex. Salvation had arrived, but would it come in time? The Patriarch gestured toward Turnus and several of the more developed hybrids, a silent command that sent them hurrying toward the exit tunnels. Then it fixed its gaze on the bound colonists awaiting infection and made a different gesture. The remaining transformed moved toward their captive kin with horrible purpose, claws extended. I knew what would happen next. The Patriarch was ordering the execution of potential hosts, rather than allowing them to be rescued. In that moment, duty overrode fear. I emerged from cover, firing the mining laser I had salvaged during my escape, its industrial beam not designed for combat, but capable of causing damage nonetheless. The red beam struck one of the transformed, burning through its carapace and dropping it to the floor. The others turned toward me, their alien faces registering something between surprise and outrage at my interference. The Patriarch itself let out a screech that vibrated the metal walls of the shuttle bay, a sound filled with psychic malice that sent me staggering back, blood trickling from my nose and ears. It advanced toward me with predatory grace, four arms splayed in a display of dominance and threat. Death approached on chitinous limbs, and I raised my pathetically inadequate weapon in one last act of Imperial defiance. The bay doors exploded inward in a shower of metal and flame. Through the smoke strode giants in ceramite armor, bolters, roaring, every shot finding its mark in hybrid flesh. The transformed returned fire with mining lasers and improvised weapons, but they might as well have been children throwing stones at tanks. The Space Marines advanced methodically, their fire patterns ensuring maximum kill efficiency with minimum risk to the surviving human captives. The Patriarch let out another psychic screech, this one carrying a different message, a command to its brood. The hybrids began to fall back towards secondary exits, covering their retreat with surprisingly coordinated fire. They were protecting the Patriarch, sacrificing themselves to ensure the survival of their progenitor. I found myself face to face with a Space Marine sergeant, his armor adorned with more skull imagery than his battle brothers. His bolter trained past me at the retreating Xenos. Medicae Sergeant Deron Vey, 47th Vostroyan, reassigned to Calros Colony. I managed to croak, my voice hoarse from days without use. The infection has spread throughout the complex. The transformed are building a beacon to summon a hive fleet. The Space Marine acknowledged this with a curt nod, then spoke into his vox. "Apothecary, we have a survivor with intelligence on the infestation, secure for debrief." Another Space Marine approached, his armor bearing the white and red insignia of an apothecary. He scanned me with Auspex devices, confirming I carried no infection, then administered stims that cleared the fog of exhaustion from my mind. "The Patriarch," I said urgently. "It escaped with some of the transformed. A foreman named Turnus seems to hold special status among them." The sergeant processed this information, relaying it to his battle brothers through their internal Vox network. We track a large Xenos signature moving toward the central mining shaft. Assault squads are in pursuit. What followed was a coordinated purge of the mining complex, the Silver Skulls methodically clearing each section, eliminating the transformed with brutal efficiency, while securing any surviving humans for medical evaluation and quarantine. I accompanied the apothecary, identifying for him the various stages of transformation I had documented, providing what little insight I could into the infection process. The Space Marines listened with grim attention to my account of the previous weeks, particularly to my descriptions of the beacon being constructed and the Patriarch's apparent ability to accelerate the infection through direct contact. They seemed to have encountered this breed of Xenos before, referring to specific containment and purification protocols with the cold precision of warriors long accustomed to such horrors. I learned that their arrival was not in response to our astropathic message, which had apparently never reached its destination. The Silver Skulls had been pursuing rumors of genestealer activity in neighboring systems, following a trail of corrupted worlds that had led them to Kalros. We were merely the latest infection site in what appeared to be a spreading infestation across the sector. The hunt for the Patriarch became the primary objective of the operation. The Space Marines believed that if it escaped, it would go into hibernation again, perhaps for decades or centuries, only to re-emerge when Imperial vigilance waned. The cycle would begin anew, with another mining team or exploration group breaking into its hibernation chamber, unwittingly releasing the horror upon another generation. I volunteered to guide a squad to extraction point Epsilon 9, the deep shaft where the infection had begun. My knowledge of the mining complex's layout proved valuable, allowing the Space Marines to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels more efficiently than they could have with only schematics. As we descended into the depths, the environment changed subtly. The walls of the shaft bore strange marks, not tool marks from mining equipment, but organic patterns that resembled the growth of some alien fungus or the constructive patterns of insect colonies. The air grew thick with an odor I had come to associate with the transformed, a musky, chitinous smell that caught in the back of the throat. The sergeant ordered his men to activate their armor's air filtration systems to maximum. For me, he provided a rebreather mask from their medical supplies, warning me not to remove it under any circumstances. The deeper we went, the more pronounced the alien influence became. Support struts had been repurposed into organic-looking structures that pulsed with an inner bioluminescence. The metal floor was covered with a resinous substance that yielded slightly underfoot. "Nesting behavior," the sergeant commented, his voice emotionless through his helmet's vox. "The brood is establishing a permanent hive. This infestation is more advanced than we anticipated." We reached the bottom of the shaft and entered a natural cavern that the mining operation had breached. Here, the transformation of the environment was complete. What had once been a simple rock cavern had been reshaped into something that resembled the interior of some great organism. The walls pulsed with veins of bioluminescent material, casting the chamber in a sickly blue glow. Organic columns supported a ceiling that dripped with viscous fluid, and everywhere, cocoon-like structures hung, some small, others large enough to contain a human body. The Space Marines moved with weapons ready, scanning the biological nightmare with their advanced sensors. Readings from their Auspex devices indicated movement deeper in the cavern complex, along with energy signatures consistent with the technological components that had been stolen from the colony to construct the beacon. We advanced cautiously, the Space Marines forming a protective cordon around me. Despite their evident distaste for civilians in combat operations, they recognized my value as both a guide and a witness to the infection's progression. The sergeant had been explicit. I was to be protected so that my knowledge could be preserved for Imperial records, ensuring that the next time such an infestation was discovered, the response might be swifter. The cavern opened into a larger chamber, and there we found the heart of the infestation. The beacon stood at the center, a grotesque marriage of Imperial technology and Xenos biology. Machine components had been integrated with organic matter, creating a device that pulsed with energy, its purpose unmistakable. It was a psychic amplifier designed to reach across the void to the distant hive mind, announcing the successful establishment of a new Genestealer cult. Around the beacon moved dozens of the transformed, their bodies now so altered that little remained of their human origins. They tended to the device with the mindless devotion of drones, adding components, adjusting settings, feeding the organic portions with fluids harvested from their own bodies. And there, upon a raised dais of hardened resin, sat the Patriarch, its massive form even more imposing in the context of the hive it had created. Beside it stood Turnus, or what had once been Turnus, now a hybrid creature that served as an intermediary between the pure-restrained Patriarch and its lesser children. The Space Marines wasted no time on reconnaissance once the target was identified. With cold efficiency, they deployed according to well-practiced protocols. Heavy weapons specialists took position, training their weapons on the beacon and the Patriarch. Assault Marines activated their jump packs, preparing to launch themselves into the mass of transformed workers to create chaos and prevent an organized defense. The sergeant gave a simple command, and the attack began. Heavy bolter fire tore through the ranks of the transformed, while assault marines descended like vengeful angels into their midst, chainswords roaring through chitin and corrupted flesh. The Patriarch rose with a screech of rage, its four arms brandishing claws that could tear through ceramite armor. Turnus and a cadre of the more developed hybrids formed a protective ring around their progenitor, firing salvaged mining lasers and improvised projectile weapons at the Space Marines. Their tactics showed a level of coordination that went beyond instinct, suggesting a collective intelligence directing their actions through the psychic link they shared. I was ordered to take cover behind an organic column, to observe but not engage. My laspistol would be useless in this conflict, and my survival to bear witness was deemed more valuable than another body in the fight. From this position, I watched a battle that seemed drawn from ancient myths, post-human warriors facing Xenos abominations in the bowels of a corrupted world. The Space Marines fought with transhuman skill, each warrior worth a dozen of the transformed in combat capability. Yet the hybrids had numbers, and they fought with the desperate ferocity of creatures defending their brood. For every transformed that fell, another would climb over its body to continue the attack. They cared nothing for self-preservation, existing only to serve the will of the Patriarch and, through it, the distant hive mind. The sergeant and his elite warriors focused their attack on the beacon, recognizing it as the primary objective. If the device activated, it would alert the Tyrannid hive fleet to Kalros, marking the planet for consumption. Demolition charges were set, while other Space Marines provided covering fire, systematically eliminating any transformed that attempted to interfere. The Patriarch, recognizing the threat to the beacon, abandoned its elevated position and charged directly into the Space Marine formation. Its speed belied its massive size, claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. The first Marine it reached was eviscerated despite his armor, ceramite plates peeling back under the force of the Patriarch's attack, revealing the vulnerable flesh beneath. The sergeant redirected his squad's fire toward the charging Patriarch, bolt shells impacting its carapace with explosive force. The creature staggered under the barrage but continued its advance, regenerating damage even as it sustained more wounds. Its psychic presence intensified, a pressure in the mind that caused blood to seep from the eyes and ears of anyone not protected by the mental conditioning of the Adeptus Astartes. I felt it like a migraine that threatened to split my skull, dropping me to my knees behind my cover. Through pain-blurred vision, I watched as Turnus broke from the defensive formation around the beacon and moved to support the Patriarch. leading a group of hybrids in a flanking maneuver that threatened to encircle the Space Marines. What happened next occurred with such speed that my human perceptions could barely follow. The sergeant, seeing the developing encirclement, ordered a tactical repositioning. The Space Marines executed a fighting withdrawal, drawing the Patriarch and its elite guard away from the beacon while the demolition team completed their work. The timing had to be perfect, allowing enough separation to avoid catching their own forces in the blast while ensuring the Patriarch remained within the kill zone. The detonation, when it came, shook the entire cavern. The beacon erupted in a fireball of mechanical components and burning organic matter. The psychic backlash of its destruction rippled through the chamber, causing the lesser transformed to fall writhing to the ground, their connection to the hive mind temporarily severed. The Patriarch itself let out a screech of rage and pain that transcended physical sound, a psychic howl that caused me to black out momentarily. When my vision cleared, the chamber had become an inferno. The resinous structures burned with chemical intensity, filling the air with toxic smoke that my rebreather struggled to filter. Through the flames and smoke, the battle continued, the Space Marines pressing their advantage against the disoriented transformed. The Patriarch, though wounded, continued to fight with undiminished ferocity. It had lost one arm to bolt fire, another to a sergeant's power sword, yet still it fought, driven by the instinctual imperative to ensure the survival of its brood, to complete its genetic mission of infiltration and corruption. Turnus and the remaining elite hybrids formed a fighting retreat, drawing back toward a secondary tunnel that led deeper into the planet's crust. They were protecting the Patriarch's escape route, sacrificing themselves to ensure the survival of their progenitor and the continuation of the brood cycle. The sergeant recognized the strategy and ordered his jump pack-equipped Marines to cut off the retreat. They soared over the battlefield, landing at the mouth of the escape tunnel, chainswords revving as they prepared to hold the position against the escaping Xenos. Caught between the advancing Space Marine tactical squad and the blocking assault Marines, the Patriarch turned its full fury upon the latter, recognizing them as the immediate threat to its survival. What followed was a display of combat prowess that demonstrated why gene stealers are among the most feared close combat organisms in the galaxy. The Patriarch moved with blinding speed, its remaining claws slashing through ceramite, flesh, and bone. 2 assault Marines fell in the first seconds of its attack, their enhanced physiology no match for the concentrated evolutionary perfection of the Patriarch's killing form. The third managed to wound it with his chainsword before a tail that I had not previously noticed whipped around, puncturing his helmet with a barbed stinger that injected some unknown toxin directly into his brain. The sergeant and his remaining tactical squad poured fire into the Patriarch's back as it slaughtered the assault Marines, bolt shells tearing chunks from its carapace, exposing the pale flesh beneath. Still it fought, driven by genetic imperatives more powerful than pain or the instinct for self-preservation. Turnus and the elite hybrids used the Patriarch's last stand as cover for their own escape, slipping past the embattled assault Marines into the secondary tunnel. I almost called out a warning, but the Space Marines had already noted the maneuver. The sergeant split his force, sending half to pursue the escaping hybrids, while he and the remainder focused on bringing down the Patriarch. The creature, sensing that its children had escaped, turned its attention fully to the remaining Space Marines. It fought with renewed purpose now, not to escape but to buy time, to ensure that Turnus and the elite hybrids could retreat to safety. In that moment, I recognized an uncomfortable truth. For all its alien horror, the Patriarch was fighting for the same thing any human parent would, the survival of its offspring. The end came suddenly. The sergeant, timing his attack with cold precision, waited until the Patriarch committed to a lunge toward one of his battle brothers. As the creature extended itself, briefly exposing its underside, the sergeant fired his plasma pistol directly into its thorax. The superheated plasma burned through the weakened carapace, liquefying the vital organs beneath. The Patriarch collapsed mid-lunge, its momentum carrying its burning body several meters across the chamber floor. Even then, it did not immediately die. It thrashed on the ground, acid ichor spilling from its wounds, dissolving the rock beneath. Its psychic presence lashed out in its death throes, causing migraines in all who stood nearby. The sergeant approached the fallen Xenos abomination with ritualistic precision, his power sword raised for the final blow. With a single, practiced motion, he severed the Patriarch's head, ending its psychic death cry and granting the Emperor's peace to the ancient horror. I watched as the Space Marines methodically secured the chamber, placing melter charges at structural points to collapse the entire cavern once they withdrew. Nothing of the alien nest would remain, no trace of the corruption that had nearly consumed our colony. The sergeant approached me, his armor bearing the scars of combat, streaked with the ichor of the Patriarch and the blood of his fallen brothers. "You have witnessed much, Medicae," he said, his voice oddly gentle despite the mechanical quality of his helmet's vox. "The knowledge you possess must be preserved for the Imperium." I nodded, too exhausted to speak, the full weight of survival finally settling upon my shoulders. The Space Marine placed a gauntleted hand upon my shoulder, steadying me as I swayed on my feet. "The mission is not complete," he continued. "The hybrids that escaped, including the one you identified as Turnus, they must be hunted down before they can establish a new brood." It was not a question, but I answered nonetheless. "I will help in any way I can, my lord. I know Turnus, knew him before his transformation. I might anticipate his movements, the places he would consider safe." The sergeant nodded and guided me toward the exit tunnel as his battle brothers completed their demolition preparations. Behind us, the remains of the Patriarch lay in a spreading pool of caustic ichor, its threat ended but its legacy still hidden somewhere in the depths of Kalros. The next 3 days were a methodical purge of the mining complex. The Silver Skulls moved with the cold efficiency of executioners who had performed their duty countless times across countless worlds. Every transformed colonist was put to the torch or bolt, every trace of the infestation excised with surgical precision. Those few humans who showed no signs of infection were quarantined aboard the Space Marine strike cruiser in orbit, subjected to extensive medical and psychological evaluation to ensure they carried no trace of the Xenos taint. I accompanied the sergeant and his command squad as they hunted for Turnus and the escaped hybrids. My knowledge of the mining complex proved valuable, allowing us to eliminate hiding places and focus our search on areas where a small group might reasonably expect to remain undetected. The hunt led us through maintenance tunnels, abandoned shafts, and finally to the colony's secondary power generation facility, a geothermal tap that drew energy from the planet's molten core. We found evidence of the hybrid's passage, discarded mining equipment repurposed as weapons, traces of the resinous substance they excreted to mark territory, and more disturbing, the partially consumed remains of maintenance workers who had been unfortunate enough to encounter them. The hybrids were establishing a new nest, beginning the cycle again with whatever biological material they could salvage. The sergeant studied the remains with clinical detachment, his helmet's sensors analyzing decomposition rates and feeding the data to the apothecary who accompanied us. "Recent," he concluded. "Within the last 12 hours, they are close." The hunt culminated in the primary heat exchanger chamber, a vast space filled with machinery that transferred thermal energy from the planet's depths to the colony's power grid. The heat was oppressive, the air shimmering with it, creating a hellish environment that seemed fitting for our final confrontation with the remaining Xenos. We found them there, Turnus and 7 other hybrids, their bodies adapted to withstand the extreme temperatures. They had begun transforming the chamber into a new nest, organic resin spreading across metal surfaces, creating structures that resembled the cocoons we had seen in the Patriarch's lair. Upon seeing us, they scattered to defensive positions, their movements coordinated even without the direct psychic guidance of the Patriarch. Turnus himself stood his ground, his transformed body bearing more human features than his. Broodmates, a cruel reminder of the man he had once been. He recognized me immediately, chittering something in the hybrid language before switching to Gothic, his voice distorted but understandable. "Medicae ve." he said, the words emerging from a mouth not designed for human speech. "You have betrayed the brood. You could have been elevated, could have known the communion. Instead, you bring death to your own kind." "You are not my kind," I responded, finding strength in hatred I had not known I possessed. "Not anymore, Turnus." He chittered, the sound almost like laughter. "I am more than Turnus now. I am the new patriarch. The Star Father blessed me before his death, passed his essence to me. The brood will continue, the cycle will continue. It is the way of all flesh, Medicae, evolution, ascension." The sergeant raised his bolt pistol, unmoved by the exchange. "Xenos corruption, nothing more." Turnus spread his forearms in a gesture reminiscent of the patriarch, a display that was both threat and invitation. "We could spare you, Medicae. The Space Marines will die, but you could join us, could help rebuild the brood. Your medical knowledge would be valuable. Your genetic material would strengthen our line." For a moment, a terrible moment that I am ashamed to recall, I hesitated, not out of temptation, but out of a physician's instinctive curiosity. Turnus represented something unprecedented in my experience, a human mind apparently intact within a hybrid body, capable of independent thought even while connected to the brood mind. The medical implications were fascinating, the potential knowledge to be gained immense. The sergeant sensed my hesitation and shifted slightly, placing himself between me and Turnus. "It lies," he said simply. "The human mind is gone. What remains is a Xenos organism using human memories to manipulate you." Turnus chittered again, his secondary arms flexing. "The Imperium lies, Medicae. They fear what they cannot control. What we offer is freedom from their oppression, unity in the brood. No more pain, no more fear, no more loneliness. Only communion." I thought of the patients I had treated, their bodies twisted against their will, their minds subsumed into the collective. I thought of Turnus's own family, his wife and children, transformed into monstrosities that bore no resemblance to the people they had been. Whatever Turnus offered, it was not freedom. It was extinction of the self, the obliteration of individual identity in service to an alien intelligence that viewed humanity as nothing more than genetic material to be harvested. "I choose humanity," I said, stepping back to allow the Space Marines clear fields of fire. What followed was brutally efficient. The Silver Skulls engaged the hybrids with coordinated precision, bolter fire tearing through chitin and corrupted flesh. The hybrids fought with desperate ferocity, using their adapted forms to climb walls and ceilings, attacking from angles that would have been impossible for humans. But against the transhuman warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, their efforts were ultimately futile. Turnus proved the most dangerous, his hybrid form combining the strength and speed of a gene-stealer with enough human cunning to make him a formidable opponent. He wounded 2 Space Marines before the sergeant engaged him directly, power sword against chitinous claws in a duel that moved too quickly for my human eyes to fully follow. The end came when Turnus, perhaps driven by some remnant of human emotion, lunged at me rather than continuing his fight with the sergeant. Whether it was hatred for my betrayal or some twisted desire to save me by forcing infection, I will never know. The sergeant intercepted him mid-leap, power sword cleaving through his torso in a spray of ichor and viscera. Turnus fell at my feet, his hybrid body twitching in its death throes. His eyes, still recognizably human despite the alien features that surrounded them, fixed, and on mine. His mandibles clicked in what might have been an attempt to speak, but no words emerged, only a wet gurgling as ichor filled his breathing orifices. Then the light faded from his eyes, and whatever Turnus had become ceased to exist. The other hybrids were dispatched with similar efficiency, the chamber secured and prepared for cleansing with promethium flame. As we withdrew, the sergeant ordered his apothecary to take tissue samples from the hybrids, particularly Turnus, for analysis aboard their strike cruiser. The Imperium would learn what it could from this incursion, would use the knowledge to better combat the next gene-stealer infestation, for there would always be a next. The Great Devourer was patient, its strategy of infiltration playing out across centuries rather than days or years. The purge of Kalros continued for 2 more weeks. Every shaft, tunnel, and chamber of the mining complex was cleared, sterilized, and where necessary, collapsed to prevent any possibility of overlooked hybrids establishing a new brood. The main settlement was subjected to similar treatment, though by the time the Space Marines reached it, the transformation of the population was nearly complete. Few survivors were found, and those who were exhibited such psychological trauma that their future usefulness to the Imperium was questionable at best. I was brought aboard the Silver Skull's strike cruiser, the Argent Valor, for debriefing and evaluation. For 3 days, I recounted every detail of the infestation to a series of interrogators, from the first appearance of Turnus in my Medicae tent to the final confrontation in the heat exchanger chamber. Particular attention was paid to my observations of the transformation process, the behavioral changes in the infected, and the construction of the psychic beacon. Nothing was too insignificant to record, no detail too minor to analyze. On the 4th day, I was brought before the ship's librarian, a Space Marine psyker whose armor bore additional sigils and wards against mental corruption. His presence was overwhelming, his psychic aura palpable even to my untrained senses. He did not speak at first, merely studied me with eyes that seemed to see beyond physical reality. "You have faced the touch of the hive mind and remained uncontaminated," he said finally, his voice resonating with power that made the air vibrate. "Few mortals can claim such resistance." I did not know how to respond, so I remained silent, standing at attention as I would before any imperial authority. "The Patriarch attempted to influence you," the librarian continued, "in the cavern and again through the hybrid Turnus. I see the psychic residue of its attempts, like shadows burned into your aura, yet you resisted." "I did my duty," I said simply. For what else could I say? I had resisted not through any special quality of my own, but through the indoctrination that all imperial citizens receive from birth, the unshakable belief in human supremacy over the Xenos that threatens us from all sides. The librarian nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You will be taken to Watch Station Epsilon Theta, where you will undergo further evaluation and eventually reassignment. Your knowledge is valuable, Medicae Sergeant Vey. The Imperium does not waste valuable resources." I was dismissed then, returned to my temporary quarters to await transport to the watch station. I did not know what awaited me there, what use the Imperium would find for a Medicae who had witnessed a gene-stealer infestation firsthand and survived to report it. Perhaps I would serve as an advisor to guard regiments facing similar threats, or as an instructor for Medicae personnel who might encounter the early stages of infestation. Whatever my fate, I would serve, as I always had. Before leaving the Argent Valor, I was granted one final audience with the sergeant who had led the purge of Kalros. He received me in the ship's armory, where servitors were repairing, and blessing his battle-damaged armor. Without his helmet, he appeared almost human, though his proportions were wrong, his features too perfect despite the scars that marked them. "Medicae Vey," he acknowledged me with a nod. "You have served the Imperium well on Kalros." "Thank you, my lord," I responded, uncertain of the purpose behind this meeting. The sergeant gestured to a servitor, which approached bearing a small metal case. Inside is a vial of Patriarch Ichor, rendered inert through chemical processes, and a fragment of its carapace. "Keep them as reminders of what you faced and survived." I accepted the case with surprise. Such trophies were rare, particularly for a common guardsman reassigned to Medicae duties. "I am honored, my lord, but why?" The sergeant's expression remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his transhuman eyes. "You held to your humanity in the face of corruption. You resisted temptation when it was offered. Such strength of will is uncommon among mortals, and it should be recognized." He turned back to the servitors working on his armor, a clear dismissal. As I left, I heard him say one final thing, though whether it was meant for me to hear, I cannot say. "Remember what you witnessed on Kalros, Medicae. Remember, and remain vigilant. The stars themselves hunger for mankind. and not all threats announce themselves with guns and ships. Some come as whispers in the blood, as promises of ascension. I have carried those words with me across the decades since Kalros, through reassignment to Watch Station Epsilon Theta, then to a succession of frontier worlds where my knowledge of gene-stealer infection protocols proved valuable in identifying and containing minor outbreaks before they could establish viable broods. I have served as advisor to Ordo Xenos Inquisitors, as instructor to Medicae adepts, as witness in the trials of those suspected of Xenos contamination. The vial of Patriarch Ichor and the fragment of carapace remain with me, carried in a lead-lined case that bears the seal of the Silver Skulls chapter. I have never opened it, never been tempted to study the contents beyond what duty requires. They are not trophies of victory, for there is no true victory in our eternal war against the Xenos. They are reminders of vigilance, of the price paid when that vigilance falters. And sometimes, in the dark hours between midnight and dawn, when sleep eludes me and memories press close, I think of Turnus, not the hybrid abomination he became, but the man he was. The foreman who brought his son to my Medicae tent with a crushed hand, who shared Amasek with me during colony celebrations, who spoke of expanding the mining operation to secure a better future for his children. I remember his humanity, and I mourn its loss, as I mourn all those who fell on Kalros. But more than mourning, I remember. I watch for the signs I first saw in Turnus. The glassy eyes, the fevered mutterings about voices in the darkness, the subtle physical changes that herald the early stages of infection. I have seen those signs 3 times since Kalros, on 3 different worlds. Each time, I have raised the alarm, initiated quarantine protocols, summoned Ordo Xenos support. Each time, the infection has been contained before it could spread beyond a handful of victims. Each time, I have remembered the sergeant's words. The stars themselves hunger for mankind. Not all threats announce themselves with guns and ships. Some come as whispers in the blood, as promises of ascension. I am Medicae Sergeant Daron Vey, formerly of the 47th Vostroyan Regiment. I have witnessed the corruption of an entire mining colony by gene-stealer infiltration. I have seen men I called friends transformed into Xenos abominations. I have assisted the Emperor's angels of death in purging that corruption, in cleansing with fire and bolter what could not be saved. And I remain vigilant, for the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The infection that consumed Kalros is still out there, spreading from world to world, from system to system, the vanguard of a hungering void that sees humanity not as an enemy to be defeated, but as biomass to be consumed, genetic material to be harvested. It offers communion instead of individuality, assimilation instead of identity, the dissolution of self into the greater whole of the hive mind. Some call it evolution. Some call it ascension. I call it extinction, the end of everything that makes us human. And so I keep watch, I maintain vigilance, I remember Kalros, for in this dark millennium there are fates far worse than death. I have seen them with my own eyes, have administered Emperor's mercy to those who suffered them, have fought against the whispers that promise release from pain, from fear, from the burden of individual existence. Mercy was never meant for men like us. But duty was, and in duty I have found purpose. The vigil continues, the watch unending, until the Emperor calls me to his side, or the shadow of the hive mind finally falls across the stars, consuming all in its path. I pray it will be the former, but I prepare for the latter. As all servants of the Imperium must, in these dark times. For the Emperor protects, but only through the vigilance of his servants, only through the sacrifice of those who stand against the darkness, only through the memory of worlds like Kalros, lost to horrors beyond comprehension, yet still a warning to those who would listen. I listened. I learned, I remember, and I keep watch.